Well, welcome to week two. We survived week one, the first week of the online portion. This is a continuation of the digestive system. We already talked about the oral cavity and the esophagus, the stomach, and now we're getting into the small intestine. But first, we want to talk about the accessory organs of the small intestine. And they are pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. Now, the pancreas is what they call retroperitoneal, and that means it's behind the peritoneal cavity. There are three parts of it. One is the head, the next is body, and next is the tail. So the head is right up in here, and it is surrounded by the duodenum. This is the body, and right here is the tail. Now, we already talked about the pancreas when we're talking about the endocrine system. Endocrine system is a ductless system full of ductless glands that secrete hormones directly into the capillary system. And that part of the pancreas that houses these glands is referred to as either the islets of Langerhans or the pancreatic islets, either one. I'll use them both if I use it on an assessment. Now, we will be talking about the exocrine part of that gland, the pancreas, and that has ducts, and it has acini, that's the plural for acinar cells, and the acini produce and secrete digestive enzymes. Next. Okay, let's continue with this study of the pancreas. The pancreatic duct starts way in the tail here, and it goes down all the way to the duodenum. That's where all of the digestive juices are secreted, and it will gather and pool in something called the ampulla of Vater. That's like a reservoir, and it will not go into the duodenum until it is released from the reservoir. And that structure is a sphincter, and the sphincter is called the sphincter of Oddi. When that relaxes, then you'll get the digestive juices going into the duodenum and to break up the chyme, the foodstuffs. Okay. Now there's a minor duodenal papilla, and papilla is the area right at the end here. It's like a pimple. You see it, that term used a lot in the body, but papilla is used here, and the major one is the one that surrounds the sphincter of Oddi. There's a minor one up a little higher, right in this area here, and that's a pretty important structure, because if there's a blockage in the major duct near the head, then all of the digestive juices will back up into the pancreas, and the pancreas will self-digest. And very, very dangerous and very painful situations. It's one form of pancreatitis. So next, let's talk about the secretions. What do the acini produce in the pancreas? Well, there's water. It's not a shock, but there's a couple other things that are interesting. One is called zymogen, and then you have enzymes, and then you have bicarbonate. Now, the zymogens and enzymes are designed to break up large food particles into smaller food particles that can be absorbed. The bicarbonate, that's pretty important. That creates an alkaline environment, because when the contents of the stomach go into the small intestine, the duodenal area, they're very acidic and caustic, and it would damage the lining of the small intestine unless that could be neutralized, and bicarbonate will do that. Okay, zymogens. Now, whenever you see Jim like that, you know it is an inactive form, and when it becomes active, whatever's in front of it is turned active. Okay, so I'll explain a little bit more in a second. So these are protein enzymes. So you have trypsinogen, and that means that trypsin, this is an inactive form of trypsin. That's what I was getting at. And then chymotrypsinogen, same thing there. The gin means it's an inactive form of chymotrypsin, and then using the same nomenclature. Oh, well, no, you can't. It's pro-carboxypeptidase. Now, you can tell that this is an inactive form because the prefix pro. Now, the ACE tells you that it's an enzyme, and the enzyme will work on anything that's in front of it. Okay? Now, for some reason, proteins are just that way. That proteins have inactive forms secreted by the glands, and they become active within the lumen. Whereas other enzymes that work on carbohydrates or lipids or nucleic acids, they are secreted in their active form. But proteins are not. Proteins are a more complex situation. Amylase is enzymes that work on whatever's in front of it, which is a carbohydrate. That's another word for carbohydrate. Lipase, same idea. And nucleic acid, same idea. Next, regulation. Now, we know how they're secreted. Now, how do they get stimulated? Okay, and there's two ways to stimulate the secretions, and one is neural and one is hormonal. What we mean by that is they're pooled in the ampulla of Vater. The sphincter of Oddi is not relaxed and open, so it's just sitting there, and we're waiting for a stimulation for that to occur, and the pancreatic secretions will go into the chyme and start to break up the foodstuffs even more. So, not a shock. It's parasympathetic in nature. It's unconscious, so it has to be autonomic. It has to be either parasympathetic or sympathetic. Well, parasympathetic is rest and digest. It says it right there. Now, there's three hormones that are important for opening things up. One is the gastrin, and gastrin is important for the enzyme release. Then you have CCK. CCK will do anything that'll help digestion in the small intestines, and that's enzyme release, but it also relaxes the sphincters. And lastly, you have secretin. Secretin will stimulate the release of bicarbonate, and that will neutralize. Okay, now why don't we start on the liver just a little bit. The liver is the largest of the internal organs. It's in the upper right quadrant, and there are two blood vessel systems that go into, one that goes out. The two that go in, hepatic artery brings in oxygen, hepatic portal vein brings in all of the nutrients that were broken down and absorbed in the small intestine. Hepatic vein takes everything back out of the liver and to the heart, and it only has one function for the digestive system, and that is the formation of bile, and we'll get into that in a second.